can you hear me?
There we go. Yep.
Good stuff. No, the question was just as regards over the past year, obviously, there's been a lot of different ways that have popped up to support artists directly, what with like Patreons and live streams and everything like that, they've live stream shows. My question was basically, what ways are there out there to directly support venues at the moment? And how do you sort of feel about that going into the future when there's sort of a new normal that's being expected and everything like that?
Yeah, I'd say it's a really good question, because something that's been interesting is like, in a place where we can't physically attend gigs, what's the venue's role now? In a world where an artist can put on a live stream, like, for example, Bandcamp, they came out with this, like, you know, streaming service for gigs and so on. But essentially in that model, you're kind of taking a promoter or a venue out of the situation. You know, so in this world where artists can directly connect through this medium we're on now, how does a venue come into it? It's a really good question. And I think that we're, as an industry, still trying to figure that out. You know, is our role as a curator, is our role as, you know, someone who facilitates the recording of the band, who, you know, do you want to come film it in our venue and so on? At the moment, I'd say number one thing people should do is go to saveourvenues.co.uk and support the work of the Music Venue Trust. So if you follow them on Facebook, Twitter, @Music Venue Trust, there's also a really good Facebook group called Music Venue Trust Activist Group. One thing that I think they've been really influential, and yeah, I do work for them, disclaimer, that they've been really influential in doing is changing the discourse around music venues and the role they play in our cultural lives. So that's even before the pandemic. They were, you know, instrumental in bringing in agent of change legislation. So you can't just build a property next door to a music venue and then complain about noise. And, you know, we just signed with the old nursery next door a deed of easement. So like a contract saying they can't complain about that. That form of contract was pioneered by the Music Venue Trust. Since the pandemic, I think they've done an incredible job of lobbying the Department Culture, Media, Sports around various exemptions, around the performing arts guidance, around funding in particular. I think this is the first time with the Cultural Recovery Fund that we saw lots of venues getting funded. So number one thing, I think support Music Venue Trust in the work that they're doing. Go to saveourvenues.co.uk, support venues who weren't able to get funded because of mostly ridiculous rules around eligibility. There's a red list in particular where like these venues kind of urgently need support. And then they're organising, you know, merchandise, competitions, live streams. Frank Turner did a live stream for a good friend of ours, the Lantern in Halifax, sorry. And just on the other night, and he raised 10 grand for them in a single live stream. 10 grand for the Lantern is, you know, that has secured the existence of that venue for another 2-3 months, you know, and that gives them light that, you know, they can make it through to spring, summer, whatever we kind of figure out how we're going to reopen under the vaccine and so forth. So number one thing, saveourvenues.co.uk, support Music Venue Trust. And then, yeah, generally, like, there's a wider question with this new digital world about the role venues play. And we'll see.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, we've got a situation where, you know, we've got a big empty room now. What do we do with it? So, you know, we were lucky at the first lockdown. We did a crowdfunder and we just had an incredible response. I mean, I didn't expect it. It was a bit overwhelming, if I'm honest. So we made money. This was before any kind of government grants were announced. This was a real, you know, that was a situation that you dread as a business, to just not know what's going to happen. So to have that money come in was incredible. But you can't keep asking people for money. You just can't. You have to offer something. Now, you know, we were so privileged to have people who cared that much about us to donate financially. And, you know, we've been really lucky that people have offered to come and help us do refurbishment for free, to come and literally come in and help us paint and stuff, because of the kind of community spirit, I think, that's kind of evolved from this place. But, you know, stuff like merchandise, you know, we've never ever sold a t-shirt before in our lives. And then, you know, we had to pivot around to this kind of new thing, like, let's sell some t-shirts and see how that goes. And actually that made us money. We were like, wow, like, we've never done that. So, you know, the simple thing of buying a t-shirt, you know, if enough people buy a t-shirt for a venue that needs money, then they will input some money in there. But it's a difficult time because, you know, like Harcourt was saying, we've got a games room that's got a pool table in it. It's got retro consoles. No one can touch that stuff anymore, right? No one can come and, you know, play on the old Nintendo. Like, that's rubbish. So kind of our business model's really got to be kind of looked at and reassessed, and like, what can we do going forward? What will people want to do going forward? That's a big thing. Like, do people want to sit at home and watch gigs now? Do people prefer that? Like, it's cheaper. Like, you know, you can just pause it, go to the toilet. You're not going to miss anything, and then just come back, right? So it's one of those that people's tastes will adapt over time always, but when it's enforced upon them like this, it's a concern that some places won't be able to catch up and work out what to do to survive. And I think that, like Harper was saying, the Music Venues Trust is alerting people to who the kind of more unfortunate venues are right now and who need the assistance. So yeah, I think this kind of actively see who's appealing for money, really. Like, we're in quite a good situation in terms of government funding. We've got our first ever bit of Arts Council funding. You know, previously we'd have never dreamed of going to the Arts Council and asking for money, and now they're giving it to us. So we're lucky. Other people aren't so lucky, and I think that, you know, whatever they're doing to raise money, sign up and do it. If it's buying a t-shirt, if it's not getting a refund on a ticket, if it's, you know, buying a ticket for a show in the future that they've booked in, that's a great way to do it, to give them some kind of ability to say, right, well, we've got an audience for a show in the future. Just anything to kind of get people kind of working as a business is key, because ultimately, you know, there's people sat around doing nothing right now and worrying about what they're going to do in the future.
Brilliant. Thank you.
We kind of touched on it already. In terms of York's music scene and nightlife scene, obviously you've been going for 5 years now, but you've obviously lived in York a lot longer. How have you seen the music scene in York change over, like, you know, the last 5 years?
I'd say that the primary issue is to do with property development, and it's really part of a wider story of what's been happening to York over the past 10 years. You know, so you've got to, like, look at, you know, venues shutting down in York, but as part of a story of, you know, York having some of the highest rising house prices outside of London, you know, certainly in the north. And then what's really happening is, like I kind of touched on earlier, you know, places that weren't really being owned by the people who are putting on the gigs in them, just essentially getting sold to developers. And that's, I think, been the major struggle, because once a band, you know, successfully books in a tour that didn't include York, well, they're like, well, do we really have to come back to York? Are we really missing that market? And so on. There's another aspect to it, which is like, if you have a really successful band who are in York, so there's a band called the Howl and the Hum. They were, you know, we're really close with them, and I think we're really kind of honoured to take a part in the career of a band who, you know, are now signed, had a really successful debut album, probably going to go quite far, right? But as a band, you need a variety of venues to play in. You can't just instantly be opening and playing in, you know, York Barbican to 2,000 people or whatever. You need to, like, learn your trade and start off playing in a small venue, 100 cap, and then move to a bigger venue like ours, like a medium-sized one, 250, 300, and then go on to play, you know, a 600 venue and so on. And as a city, as York, if we have a variety of venues of different sizes, it means that bands can come here at different points in their career, you know, whereas if we only have one venue of one capacity, we can only have a certain tier of band, you know, and we try our hardest to get people, you know, and kind of pride ourselves on managing to get bands and artists who are of a higher cap usually to come play like a B market in York, like a working men's club in York, is like, we're really proud of that. But long term, it's not the healthiest thing for a city as well. So part of the work we've been doing is working quite closely with York Council now. We petitioned York Council to pass a motion pledging to protect music venues in York. And, you know, they passed that unanimously. So one thing that they're doing is kind of forcing developers to sit down with the people in York who are part of the music scene and to try and work through some of these issues and making it a condition on some of the planning developments that are happening. Like, no, you can't just shut down like another venue. You have to either put something in its place or, you know, find a solution elsewhere and so on. So those conversations are kind of starting to happen now, which is much more healthier. So yeah, I think it's a bit of a mixed picture in York. Whilst we've got those issues, I think that like now that the scene is working together a bit more to kind of stand up to developers and work together with the council to say, look, we're just as culturally important to tourism, the city of York, as the museum or the Minster, or, you know, like we're probably bringing just as much revenue in as one of these galleries or major attractions that normally you'd really consider part of your tourism offer. You know, why aren't we part of that as well? And that's kind of opened a lot of doors locally with the council and kind of other stakeholders. So it's been an interesting like couple of years as we've kind of sought to take like a wider role within the community as well.
Go ahead.
Howdy. So, plagiarism, really, do you ever worry about that? Like either other musicians copying your style or your songwriting elements, or yourself sometimes subconsciously tackling an idea that someone else has done?
I think in all writing in general, and this even goes back to, you know, the Baroque era. You know, there were groups of people like Bach, Handel, who were very influenced by a guy called Buxtehude. And it was all the music was of its type, and they kind of all got off on each other. And I'm sure if you listen to Paul McCartney talking about all this, they all used to be, they'd hear a song, he would say, oh, I heard such and such, and let's write one of those, you know. So there's always an element of reinterpretation in all of us, I think. And I certainly listen to great songs and say, oh God, I wish I'd written that. And, you know, you know, and you can use that as a springboard to take you somewhere completely different, which is not plagiarism. That's just influence. There are people who just blatantly nick stuff, and sometimes they get away with it and sometimes they don't, you know. Somebody tried to nick one of Bruce's and mine's song once, but there was a minor legal exchange and it stopped. But, you know, it does happen. And but I think, you know, it's cool to be original, but you can listen to somebody else's idea to find your own originality.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for that. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Hello. Hello. Yeah, I was just wondering, you mentioned earlier about changing creative process for working with a different genre. I was wondering whether if you could recall any like breakthrough pieces of technology which also forced you to change your creative process. For example,
I don't. Okay. I mean, certainly one of the biggest things, of course, was sampling when it became for the masses, when you could have real instruments at your fingertips in any form. That was just amazing because you could suddenly work having gone from sort of synthesizers where it's very much a synthesized set. I mean, you know, at the time we'd have a Jupiter 4 or something and play a string patch, and you convince yourself it sounded like strings, and of course it sounded absolutely nothing like it at all. It sounded wonderful, but it's of itself, you know. But the minute you could start actually getting replications of the real things, you suddenly had a much broader brush to orchestrate with, simply. I mean, so, and you could do it in your room or in a studio as opposed to having to hire loads of things to experiment. So that was the biggest thing. And I think also when the sequencer, you know, became like a recorder, those two things just gave you so much power. And it changes the way you work because, you know, once upon a time you'd routine the song with your co-writer or whatever, then you'd hit play on the tape machine or record on the tape machine, and off you'd go, and you'd do your best to get through 3 minutes or whatever it was without screwing up. And that was the thing you then built on. But nowadays, of course, you can work on a couple of bars for an hour, which I do when I play cello because I can't play it properly anymore.
That's brilliant. So with like Trevor Horn, were you writing with Trevor Horn with the Fairlight? Were you like writing for his style, and were you taking into consideration the Fairlight itself, or?
Not really, to be honest with you, because I was a very young thing at the time, and he was, I discovered all these things because of him. So I would just write the way I wrote. I'd just do my little Porter Studio demos, and he would take them and just apply this huge cutting edge stuff to it. And it was mind blowing, actually. Videotech, particularly, actually, and Give Me Back My Heart, the $2 records. He used the technology brilliantly to make things sound just different, very musical, but very, very different. And so that was quite stunning, actually.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Cheers, Cameron.
Bye.
Hi again. I was just wondering, another quick question about music copyright is, recently I was reading up on an article about Twitch, which is like obviously a streaming gaming site. People play game music in the background, and I know that I think it was in North America that there was a new bill apparently which being passed or was under review about how like music copyright is administered through like streaming on games when streamers are like playing music in the background. And I remember actually that it got to the point where, because it was like the streamers were using it so much, and like there wasn't any any money being paid back towards the artist, that they were making it like to the point to a felony offense to pay music while streaming games. I was wondering how is that gonna will that be like an effective way to kind of like make sure that artists are paid correctly, and all the distribution of royalties are going back straight to the artist instead of streamers making a profit instead of the artist.
So there's a number of different levels to your question. I think if anything you think Simon and I have said is confusing about copyright, then trust me, the US system is about 100 times worse. And the bill you're talking about was called the Music Modernization Act, which came in pre-Trump. It was actually the last piece of legislation under Barack Obama, and it was designed to reflect the fact that nobody actually knew who was licensing what, and a lot of things weren't being licensed in the US, and they were trying to simplify it. Twitch is another really interesting example of a service which looks like a broadcast service but claims it isn't a broadcast service, and claims it's merely providing a pipe between A and B. So you've got the question is, who's liable for that copyright? The pipe who's broadcasting it from A to B, or the person who is broadcasting it themselves? And depending on how you answer that question is, are you licensing one person, Twitch, which as it happens to be owned by one of the largest multinational tech companies in the world and is making money for it, or do you go after the hundreds of thousands of gamers who are broadcasting it themselves? Clearly, as a licensing body, the last thing you want to do is to go after the hundreds of thousands of individuals, when actually you want to do is go after Twitch. So their Twitch is not unusual, but obviously it's massive. It's I think it would be fair to say if that happened on YouTube, and if you were sitting there watching a video of Fortnite on YouTube, then the music in that would be paid through to PRS if we could find it from YouTube. But where it's a live stream, in a sense, if you think the way that YouTube works is it uses content ID, so it finds the work, it matches it against the sound recording, and then it spits out a bit of data. That technology is not quite as effective at live streaming, and one of the biggest problems we've all got is how do you track works on live stream. So video games, Twitch, absolutely a licensing opportunity, absolutely ongoing conversations, discussions about how best to monetize it. But I agree with you, that's you can fill Wembley with people watching other people playing FIFA 21. Do you know what I mean? It's clearly where that kind of value sits, and we all know that you know, if you get a work in FIFA 21, it goes on the Spotify playlist called FIFA 21, and you know, my 13-year-old son listens to it over and over and over again. So the links are there. I don't think the industry's quite got the value right, but we have to.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because obviously when these gamers, they're not obviously like, you don't really want to go after them because they're just kind of like only trying to provide, you know, music for the background for their thing, but at the same time you want to make sure that the artist is getting their fair due of money, so the value is there. So it's like, it's in a way it's a bit hard because it's like you want to, you know, they're just trying to make a living and they probably get like a percentage taken off their revenue when, you know, after they finish the live stream. Obviously Amazon, who owns Twitch, and Twitch will take a percentage off, but it was good to hear some feedback because obviously it's just, you know, interesting how they're going to try and sort that one out and try and make sure that the money is going, some money at least, going back towards the artist and not straight to Amazon, Twitch, or sadly even the gamer himself. But thank you.
I think actually it's kind of the point I made earlier about augmented reality. Whilst, you know, the player, the user who's playing is playing music, because who wants to watch 2 hours worth of a Twitch video without music? Do you know what I mean? So it's about they're adding value to what they're doing, and all we're saying is if you're adding value, then there's someone who needs to share in that value. And I think that's the broader debate you get into.